Hi, welcome to session 3. Today's training is for teachers and therapists servicing students with language delays and disabilities. We're talking all about verbal behavior and how to set the stage for MAND training. As special educators, it's important that we also look at typically developing peers. By the age of 2, a typically developing peer has an expressive vocabulary of 50 words. By the time that learner is 5, they have an expressive vocabulary of 1,500 words. Traditional accounts of language view language development as an innate biological process. There's a huge emphasis that's placed on the topography or the form of language. Words and sentences such as syntax, grammar, morphemes, phonemes, etc. Traditional accounts of language classify language into 2 categories: expressive language and receptive language. In 1957, behaviorist B.F. Skinner offered a behavioral interpretation of language. He viewed language not as an innate cognitive process, but rather that language is behavior. And as a behavior, it's best analyzed by what comes before the behavior, antecedent, and what comes after the behavior, consequence. So a word is not defined by its form, rather, it's defined by its function. In verbal behavior, we look at language into 5 categories called verbal operants. There are 5 verbal operants. This includes the mand, which is requesting, tact, which is another word for labeling, echoic, which is a vocal imitation or a manual sign imitation for signers, listener behavior, which we also call receptive, and intraverbal, which are your questions and conversations. The first verbal operant we'll discuss today is called the mand. The mand is defined as a demand, a command, or a request. The mand is the most powerful form of language. It's powerful because there's motivation. There's a motivation that's present, which is directly connected to the behavior, which is the mand or the request, which is then directly connected to the consequence. They receive the desired reinforcer or the outcome. Here's an example. A student saying candy because they want candy. The antecedent that comes before the behavior is that there's motivation present. The behavior is says candy, and the direct consequence is receiving the candy. Here's some examples of additional kinds of mands. Requesting by indicating, pointing to an item that you want. Requesting for items present, and requesting for items that are not present, which could include actions in the future. Requesting for others to perform actions, requesting for missing or needed items for a task, requesting for help from others, requesting for attention from others, or requesting others to remove or stop an unwanted activity, requesting using descriptors like adjectives and adverbs, and the list goes on. The next verbal operant we'll discuss is called the tact. The tact is naming or labeling objects, actions, events, or other kinds of stimuli that a person comes in contact with. That stimuli must be present. So the antecedent here is that a stimuli is present. A person then tacts or labels that stimuli. And then the consequence is that they get some sort of non-specific socially mediated reinforcement. And that's super fancy for just saying they got reinforcement. The reinforcement they receive, however, is not directly connected to the behavior or the antecedent. That's different than the mand. Here's an example. Saying candy because you see candy. The learner sees a picture of a candy. The learner says candy. They tact and label that picture. And the consequence is that the teacher says, "Ah, good job," and gives a high five. Here's some more examples. Labeling something that you see. Labeling something that you hear. "Oh, I hear an airplane." Labeling something that you feel. "Oh, this feels soft." Labeling something that you taste. "Oh, this is sour." Labeling items, people, places, actions, events. Labeling using descriptors such as adjectives, adverbs, etc. The list goes on. The next verbal operant we call an echoic, and that just means repeating, or you could say echoing, exactly what is heard, or for our signers, imitating a manual sign. We also call that a mimetic. The antecedent here would be a verbal stimulus. The echoic matches that antecedent, and then again, that non-specific socially mediated reinforcement. Here's an example. Saying candy after someone else says candy. Teacher says candy. The learner says candy. The teacher says good job and gives a high five. Verbal operant number 4, intraverbals. Answering questions, fill-ins, or having conversations where someone else's words are controlled by another person's words. So the antecedent here is a verbal stimulus. The behavior again is intraverbal, and then a non-specific socially mediated reinforcement. Let's give an example here. Someone is saying candy after someone else says, "What is something you eat?" Teacher says, "What is something you eat?" Learner says candy. Teacher says good job. There's no stimuli present except for that verbal stimulus. That's the difference between, say, tacting and an intraverbal. Examples: filling in words to a song. The itsy bitsy, student says spider. Filling in words to a sentence. The cow says, student says moo. Answering personal questions. Answering other kinds of WH questions. And asking questions or having some social interaction. The list goes on. The last verbal operant we call listener behavior. We also call it receptive language. That's following instructions or motor responses to what someone else says. The verbal stimulus comes before the behavior. Then there's some sort of motor response to that antecedent. And then non-specific socially mediated reinforcement. Here's an example. Handing someone candy after another person says, "Give me some candy." Antecedent, teacher says, "Give me candy." Learner hands the candy to the teacher. The consequence, teacher says, "Good job." Here's some more examples of listener behavior. Following directions. They could be one-step directions, two-step directions, etc. Demonstrating an action when given a direction. Show me clapping. Show me jumping. Turn around. Identifying items, objects, pictures when given a direction. Find the picture of the cow. Following directions presented to a whole group. Everybody go line up. Following directions with discrimination. All the girls go to the bathroom. The importance of behavioral classification of language. A word is not defined by its form. A word is defined by its functional category. Why is this word being used and what is the function? For example, the word candy can have many different meanings based on the conditions under which it's being said. A lot of kids with autism and other disabilities don't have the ability to generalize and use that same word candy in a variety of different categories. It's important to explicitly teach children the same word, candy, across all of the different operants. First step, always start with mand training. Quick review, what is a mand? A mand is a request, a command, or a demand. It's the most powerful form of language because it produces immediate reinforcement related to motivation. It's also the first form of language to be acquired. Here's a quick example. A student wants a cookie. Student asks for a cookie. Student receives cookie. What are the benefits of man training? Man training produces immediate benefits for the speaker. It results in delivery of reinforcing items specific to the learner's current motivation. It teaches a learner that by talking and signing, that behavior is valuable because it results in the delivery of things that they want. It also increases spontaneous language and social initiations over time. Teaching an effective and more appropriate way of asking for things will replace problem behavior. Also, man training will pair a teacher with reinforcement and open the door for teaching more opportunities and more difficult and complex language. How to teach manding. Selecting targets. In order to teach mands, you need to know what students like. The items you're trying to teach the student to ask for must be a reinforcer. It must be something that's desired. The specific item that you teach must be valuable and motivating to the student at the very moment you plan to teach the mand. This requires that teachers look for indicators from students that the item is motivating for them in that moment. Maybe they're reaching for the item or looking at the item. There are many different profile learners. Some students like a lot of things. They may have many items that act as reinforcers. For these students, you might be teaching a lot of different kinds of mands because of the range of items and activities that are valuable to the student. Other students have limited reinforcers. For these students, you may have two goals: teaching mands for the current reinforcers, and then setting up procedures to try and teach the student to be interested in more items. Contexts and environments. Manding is not taught in a discrete trial format where teachers determine how many responses occur before presenting trials. In addition to scheduled man training sessions, manding should happen throughout the day within preferred activities, play-based activities for younger students or leisure activities for older students, and naturally occurring routines such as snack time or getting ready for class or getting ready to go home. The number of times a specific mand can be taught depends on the motivation of the student. We can't decide exactly how many mands occur per day, but we can capture and contrive motivation throughout the day to increase the number of mands. If we're not successful in capturing and contriving motivation, we cannot teach the mand because motivation must be present. We may have a lot of opportunities throughout the day, and we should never restrict those opportunities to only a specific amount of times. Capturing and contriving motivation. Again, mands only occur when motivation is strong. Therefore, we need to make the learner want an item before prompting a mand. Have a variety of items and activities available. To maximize teaching opportunities each day, we need to capture and contrive as many opportunities per day to teach our students how to mand across a variety of items and activities. Contriving motivation refers to the conditions in which the teacher must directly arrange the environment to make something valuable. For example, giving the student his yogurt, but not immediately providing a spoon makes that spoon valuable. Avoid accidentally reducing motivation by giving too much or too many freebies. For example, giving a student a spoonful or two of yogurt in a separate bowl instead of handing over the entire container of yogurt. Prompting considerations. Before prompting a mand, the learner must declare motivation for an item. So you're looking for that type of behavior of them looking at an item or reaching for an item. So you know the motivation is present. Then prompting mands initially is really important. This is a part of the teaching process. You prompt initial mands to reduce the effort required for the learner to obtain the desired items. When prompting mands, always use the least intrusive, yet the most effective prompt necessary. Be sure to fade your prompt quickly by implementing what we call stimulus controlled transfer procedures. That's super technical, and we're going to go over that in session 4. Developing a plan. Prior to your manding sessions, you need to identify what reinforcers you will have available to the student. A variety of reinforcers should be offered within an activity or within your mand training session. For example, if you're playing with an activity set, such as lacing beads, you should have various parts to the activity set, as well as some small edible reinforcers and a preferred drink, maybe, all available for the learner to mand during your session. Identify which motivating operations can be captured or contrived within that activity, meaning what are the various things they could ask for. You may also need to contrive motivation by being super creative. You might vary the way you play and interact with the items. You might add additional items to the activity to have a variety of reinforcers available. Remember, it's your job to identify ways in which you can be a part of the activity to make it more fun. We're always still pairing. A good mand training session is not just about restricting access and having control over the reinforcers so that your student has to ask for them, but a good mand training involves contriving motivation to increase the range of items and activities that can act as reinforcers. How can mand training be incorporated in the day? You can schedule times for mand training sessions, periods of time that are free from other instructional demands. Mand training sessions should be about 20 to 30 minutes in duration. Of course, this is flexible. It can be conducted in a group setting too, but not right away. A minimum of once a day, ideally 2 to 3 times a day, in addition to naturally occurring times to mand. Those include snack, play and leisure, etc. When thinking about your learner and selecting a functional communication system, there's important things to remember. What is functional communication? Functional communication is a method of speaking that provides access to all essential people, that is and can be student initiated, not teacher controlled. A student has easy access to, it's always available, it's transportable, and the big one is that it's more efficient than problem behavior. What it is not is prompt dependent. So a teacher constantly saying, what do you want, or use your words, or get your book, or get your device is not functional communication. Functional communication is not difficult to access. It should not be on the shelf, or taped to a desk, or in a book bag, or left at home. It also should not be fixed in one area, taped to a wall or fixed to a desk. And it should not be limiting. Limited symbols or locked pages or ripped or misplaced icons is not functional. What are your next steps in setting everything up? So the first step is to gather and organize your reinforcers for easy and fast access. I love to use reinforcer bins or have a shelf with everything displayed that the student can request. Step 2 is create a list of each student's reinforcers for all the staff to see. We call that a preference list. This should be continuously added to throughout the year as more reinforcers are discovered and developed. Number 3, make sure each reinforcer has a determined name so that all staff and All staff are teaching the same label. Non-vocal students using an alternative method of speaking should be all set up. For vocal learners, just a tip, choose labels that match your student's vocal ability. You can write down what the best approximation is. Your speech teacher can help with this. Students who are on a picture exchange communication system, make sure you're choosing the appropriate iconicity. For manual signers, learn and or develop adapted signs. Create a cheat sheet for staff, caregivers to send home. For your speech generated devices, you want to make sure you program the device with the appropriate iconicity and label for reinforcers. Do not require navigation initially. This should be fast and easy for the student. Now you're all set and ready to go, and it's time to learn how to teach. Watch session 4 training video, Mand training procedures. In session 4, I'll provide you with the information on specific Mand training procedures, effective prompting methods, prompting feeding procedures, and how to take data and adapt for students with alternative methods of speaking.